which was it the first time I was generation by.
That's not me talking. So we can get started then. So if I just pass it over to the panelists who will introduce themselves, and we take it from there. If you have questions, feel free to pop it in the chat, and they'll have a chance reading that out. But yeah, Miranda, if you want to go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hello. I'm Miranda. So I'm a second-year trainee, and I'm currently training at Manchester. Just to give you like a very brief background on me. So after I did my undergrad, I did a year of irrelevant experience, then went into an AP role for about 3 years, working in the private sector, almost exclusively working with children and adolescents. I applied for the doctorate twice, that's a lie. In my dreams, it would be once, it was twice. The first time round was an absolute hot mess. And then the second time, I did manage to turn it around. So if any of you are kind of in that situation, I'd be glad to answer some questions around that. In terms of where I'm training at the moment, so I've got quite a big cohort, there's 24 of us. There's just the one boy, the rest of us are women. And we all actually come from very different walks of life. People who have come from a clinical background, people who've been research assistants, people who've got only kind of undergraduate level qualifications, and then we've got 4 or 5 people who already have PhDs. So it really does cover absolutely everything. So yeah, if you do have any questions specifically about Manchester, but I also applied for Bath, for Coventry and Warwick, and for Oxford. So if anything's kind of directed in that direction, I'd be happy to help.
Okay, and Ellie?
Hi everyone, so I'm Ellie. I am a second-year trainee at Exeter. My journey onto training was probably quite straightforward. I did a 4-year undergraduate degree in psychology at Cardiff, and I did a placement year during that degree in a low secure forensic learning disability service. Then I graduated in 2017, and I suppose I was fairly lucky in that I got an AP role quite quickly after. I probably put that down to the placement year I had at undergrad. And I was an assistant in a community learning disability service. And that was split post with a learning disability assessment and treatment unit. And I did that for a year. And then the post changed, so it was at the assessment and treatment unit full time. And I did that for probably another 10-ish months before getting onto the doctorate. I don't have a master's, I just have an undergraduate degree. What else to say? So during uni, I did some kind of volunteering in like mental health placements and stuff, and I also, the people I lodged with, their little boy had autism, so I would like babysit him and take care of him sometimes. My cohort, there's 15 of us, 2 boys and the rest girls. We have I think a really good kind of mix of different people. We've got quite a few people of kind of BAME, ethnicity, age ranges go from 25 to 35, and everyone on my course has quite a varied entry into the cohort. So not all of them have had assistant roles, not all of us have masters, no one has a PhD on top. Yeah, so any questions about Exeter specifically, let me know. I'll probably should say that I applied 3 times. The first time I applied when I was still an undergraduate, I was very keen, even though there's like, I think there are only 5 people across 5 years that went straight from undergraduate to the doctorate, so I didn't hold my hopes up too high, but I wanted to get a sense of the application form and the process, and if I could go to any of the kind of entry exam things. So that was very much my kind of practice run. And then I applied first time coming out of uni, but I'd only been in my role for about a month when I applied, and then I applied again the following year. First year I got no interviews, obviously. Second year I still got no interviews, but I hadn't been in my AP post very long. And then the year I got 3 interviews, one at Surrey, one at Cardiff, South Wales course, and one at Exeter. It was a straight no from Cardiff, reserve place at Surrey, and place offered at Exeter.
Great, thank you. And Rhiannon?
Hi, I'm Rhiannon. I am a newbie. I just started my training, was it last week? It feels like a lot longer. It's been intense. Just being in front of the computer screen for so long. So I'm training at UEA, so kind of Norwich, but it covers such a massive area. My kind of journey into training, I suppose. So I did my undergrad in Plymouth. I did a sandwich course, so I had a placement year as well, which I did on acute and recovery mental health wards. And then in my last year of uni, my supervisor from my placement was setting up a personality disorder service. And so I stuck around with her and volunteered for that year, just helping with that service. I got DBT trained doing that, so that was great. Then when I finished my undergrad, I did a year as a support worker within a crisis team, and then from there I moved to Coventry for my first paid AP role, and I was there for 4 years. So I was working within early intervention in psychosis services. I got involved in research, so I was working on a randomized control trial, but I also kind of was able to do some other kind of therapeutic work, so family work, carer focused stuff, sort of CBT based things with the people in that service. And then after 4 years there, I got onto training this year. So I applied a grand total of 5 times. I had an interview each year, but the first time I applied was pretty much straight out of uni. And yeah, that's kind of it really in terms of that. I don't know what happened this year that got me on, but yeah, I was fortunate enough that it happened for me this year. In terms of my cohort, so we are quite big, there's 30 of us, and there's probably around, I'd say, I may be overestimating a little bit, but I think there's around 10 men, which is pretty good for the psychology course. And again, we're pretty diverse. We're all from lots of different backgrounds. We've got an international student from Hong Kong, kind of anything from 24 up to, I'm not sure what the oldest person on our course is. I think she's around 40. So yeah.
Thank you. And finally, we've got Kirsty.
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you, even though lots of you are black squares that I can't see. I'm Kirsty, I'm a Hearts trainee, just gone into my final year. a little bit about my experience pre-training. It's a little convoluted. I always find it a bit tricky to summarize, so hopefully some of your questions will help draw some of it out as well. It hasn't been quite as neat and straightforward as many of the others. So most of my experience pre-training was support work, care work, and kind of recovery work focused. I also did a placement year alongside kind of working in autism services whilst at uni. So coming out of undergrad, I graduated in 2012, and by that point I'd had a fair amount of experience within LD settings, and then went and worked in the charity sector for quite a number of years, mostly in learning disability support and adult mental health support. I also went and worked in India and Sri Lanka for a little while, attached to several mental health projects, and did some recovery work stuff in Australia, and then came back to the UK in a neurodevelopmental team. And alongside that, I worked there for about a year and a half, and alongside that started a master's and actually ended up getting into the doctorate and pulled out of the master's before doing the research element of the master's. So I ended up kind of pulling out at PG dip. Yeah, I'm sure there are other things too. I did loads of random things alongside, but I'm sure some of it will come out in the questions. A little bit about Hearts. So our cohort is fairly small. We have 16, although it's just grown in size with the extra recruitment this year. So this year's cohort was 24, I think. Again, like others have said, a real diversity across the board, lots of life ranges of experience. It's amazing really when you get on how varied everyone's experiences are. And I know kind of from pre-training feeling like everyone had assistant posts and everyone had done loads of therapy, and there's all of these things that you need to do before getting on, but honestly it really isn't that way. I think by the point of getting on to training, I had never really done one-to-one therapy, if that is in any way helpful to know for any of you. I had applied 3 times, once I think the year after undergraduate, and then I took a couple of years break while I was out of the UK, and then another couple of times before getting on. Yeah, happy to answer any of your questions, fire away, and I'm sure we can all help.
So they've already kind of started pouring in. So the way we'll do this is I'll ask the questions, and then each member of the panel will have a chance answering, unless you have a question that's directed to a specific person. So we've got a question from Shannon, who asks, where did you interview and how did you find each university interview process? Miranda, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I interviewed at Bath and Manchester. I pulled out of an interview at Cov and Warwick, but I know a bit about their application process because it was quite late in the game that I pulled out. Manchester was half an hour, just in and out. So it was kind of like vignette based. So you had like different discussions around like an ethical question, like a research question, and then like clinical skills type question, which suited me quite well. I like the pulling off of the band-aid type situation. It worked for me. Bath, by contrast, was half a day, and so they split into like a clinical interview, a research focused interview, and then there was a written task. So which I think, you know, is nice for some people because like it means you have several chances to shine. I just found that interview quite hard because they didn't like prompt you at all. So they just asked a question and then it just died. Like you just stopped speaking and then that was it. And then you moved on. Whereas like Manchester was a bit more back and forth, which like felt like a normal conversation. But yeah. And then I know Coventry and Warwick, they have like a long day of different things, but I didn't actually go there. But yeah, like overall, everyone was very nice and very helpful, and I haven't had any, I know some people have had some quite like ghastly, terrifying experiences with interviewers, and I am yet to have that, which was nice. I was thankful for that.
Thank you. Ellie?
So I interviewed at Surrey, Cardiff and Exeter. So I found, I'll start with Surrey. So Surrey's interview was, to me, felt like a bit of a car crash, if I'll be honest. I found it really tough. They have two interviews, and we also, before the second interview, had to watch a video and discuss it in the second interview. So one of the interviews was called something like personal interview or something, and the other one was more like professional interview. And I found the personal one really difficult. I didn't know what to say. It was asking me quite a bit about my personal life, which felt really odd. Yeah, and I felt like I came out of that and I'd really kind of done really badly. And then the professional one went okay because they asked more questions that you would kind of expect. I also did the entrance test for Surrey 3 times. Every year was slightly different. So the first 2 years were both multiple choice. The first time I did it, I'm not very good at research. I'll just put that in there now. So the first year I found okay. I didn't feel like it was like crazy hard research questions. And I think there was some stuff around kind of making judgments about ethics and professional settings and stuff. Can't remember that much. The second year was impossible. I sat there and stared at the paper for the time and just was like, B, D, A, I don't know the answer. I didn't even understand the question sometimes, so that didn't go very well. And then the year that I got an interview, they changed it to an online format. And I can't, like, this is really crap of me, I can't remember that much of what we did. I know there was some more multiple choice, but there was also like a written element, but I can't remember what it was about. Sorry, that's really unhelpful. So then South Wales and Exeter both have a test before interview, and that is a verbal reasoning and a numerical reasoning test that you do online at home. I found the verbal reasoning one fine. You kind of just have to kind of extract data from text and stuff. It wasn't that hard. The numerical one, like the Surrey test, was horrible. I guessed half the answers. They're timed as well, and I ran out of time. The last question I remember just picking C, and I didn't even read what the question was. But it went okay, I guess, because I got through to interview. South Wales interview, there was a written element to that. You had to read a load of information. It was kind of vignette based and then answer questions about it. And then there were 2 or maybe 3 interviews. I really should have sat down and thought about this before tonight. There were 2, I think. One was, I didn't really understand why there were 2. Like, they asked a range of questions, research questions, clinical questions, but both did. One had a service user attend as well, which was pretty cool. And then Exeter was my favourite out of the 3. And I don't know whether I've just got biased hindsight because I got on there, but it felt really well supportive. So the other ones, I felt like you just sit there really nervous, maybe talk to someone next to you, maybe not. And the trainees on the course would kind of just stick to themselves and talk amongst themselves, and you really had to go out of your way to ask them stuff. Whereas Exeter, you're assigned a buddy on the day. So I sat with my buddy for probably a good kind of half an hour, because I was super early, as you do, and she really put me at ease, and it was really nice to chat to someone instead of sit there and worry about what's about to happen. So Exeter have an interview and a group task, and you have to read some information that they ask you questions on in the interview before the interview. Exeter asked me questions that I most expected and felt more prepared for than perhaps other interviews that threw a few kind of weird curveball questions in, and I would just sit there panicking. I need to wing this somehow. I don't know the answer. But Exeter felt more like I could shine through, and I could really talk about who I was at that moment in time as a clinician, who I wanted to be out of the end of training, etc. And then someone's washing up. And then the group task was we watched a video about a person with lived experience of mental health problems, and then we all had to sit in a circle and discuss it. And I'm pretty sure it was kind of like discuss, and we all just sat and looked at each other for a minute, and then kind of the conversation got going. But yeah, it was okay actually. It was probably all in all about a couple of hours, but you had your buddy all the time, so you weren't kind of floating about the building on your own. And I've forgotten what the original question was, but I think that answers it. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you, Rhiannon.
Okay, so I had one interview each year. So my first one was at Hearts. I'm going to leave that to Kirsty because I can't really remember it. It was so long ago, and I don't remember it fondly, but I think that's because I just wasn't prepared really for it, and it was my first time applying, because actually it was fairly similar to the other ones that I've had. So I think it was just the case of how I felt on the day, and because I was really anxious, which is why I feel like that. I interviewed at Warwick. So yeah, that's a whole day, but that felt really kind of well supported. There were lots of trainees there all throughout the day, and it was quite nice. They kind of got you to talk to one another so that it didn't feel as competitive. I know that's quite difficult because we all know how competitive it is, but they tried to make it like a little bit more like you guys are a team. So there was a group exercise which was just picking different topics and chatting about them together. So that was quite nice. And then you just had the clinical and research interview, and then I think there was a written exercise with a video as well, and kind of putting together a formulation. But I found that process was again really nice and well supported. It didn't feel like they were trying to trip you up at any point. And then I have interviewed 3 times for UEA, so I just kept bothering them until they let me in. And again, the first one I remember with absolute horror. I had a bit of a meltdown after my research interview, going into my clinical one. But again, I felt really well supported there, and everyone was really understanding about how nervous everybody is. And with UEA, it's a research and then a clinical interview, and usually there's a written task, which is just like kind of GCSE level maths and literacy type things. It's just one of the boxes that they have to tick. But this year they didn't do that because kind of everything went online very last minute. But yeah, my experience of interviews has been, you know, generally positive from the point of view of the courses. I think just some of the way that my mind has shifted as I've gone along has been more to do with how I felt on the day, and that I was really anxious, or, you know, just perhaps that I'd put a bit too much pressure on myself, and then it just all came crumbling down around me on the day.
Right, and finally, Kirsty.
Yeah, I similarly, I think I had 4 interviews over the 3 applications. So the first year I applied, I interviewed at Surrey and Salomons. I think I somehow must have magicked the test, which I never got through again. So I definitely relate to what Ellie was saying earlier. My memory of Surrey and Salomons interviews are very blurry, I'll be honest, because they would have been probably 7 years ago. But certainly Surrey, I remember being quite personal, and I think most people you speak to about the Surrey interview would share the same experience. I think I had worked with a fair few Surrey trainees at that point in time, so I was kind of like mentally prepared for it to be personal, which kind of asks some quite personal questions about your life and your experiences. Salomons, I remember being similar in a sense of some personal questions, but a lot more kind of what you would expect from some clinical questions, some research questions, drawing on your skills and experiences. And I remember kind of both of them feeling fairly supportive in a sense that it felt like they wanted the best from you. I think I got onto the reserves at Surrey and got nowhere at Salomons at that point in time. And then what happened? I think my second application, I interviewed at Staffordshire. Yeah. And to be honest, I don't have a huge memory of that interview. I don't know what happened. Something's clearly just blurred over that interview. I do remember it being in 2 parts, and I remember, similar to how other people were saying, that there was some kind of buddying process. I didn't get anywhere on that interview, so clearly it didn't go amazingly. And then the final time I applied, I think I only got an interview. Yeah, I only got an interview at Hearts. So actually I applied to Staffordshire again and didn't get an interview that year. The Hearts interview is split into 3. So you do a kind of clinical / personal interview with a couple of clinicians interviewing you, a research task, which is based on a vignette, and a group task, which is based on a kind of clinical vignette. And overall, I found that a really supportive process. I think there's always trainees there throughout the day, kind of taking you between the different tasks. It would have been different this year, of course, because it was online, but yeah, I found most of that interview fairly doable. I think that they set it up in a way that allows for people to be really different. So for example, I definitely would share Ellie's views on kind of feeling that research isn't really my strong point. And I think the research task at Hearts allows for people to kind of answer it in whichever way they kind of align, whether it's quants, qual, that kind of thing. So that I found really helpful. Yeah, that was my experiences.
Great, thank you. Next question we've got from Lily is, have any of you had experience in the past where you meet the minimum criteria but still didn't get invited to test/interview? So you're meeting that minimum criteria but still not getting that shortlisted. Miranda, does that apply to you?
No, is the short answer. So I will pass on to anyone else.
Ellie?
Not personally, but I believe I know someone that happened to them. They did the Trent test one year, and then next year Trent came back and said, you don't meet our criteria, and he was like, well, you let me last year, so what's going on, kind of thing. But I don't know if you ever got to the bottom of it. It is a bit weird. Usually if you email the uni about it, they probably quite responsive and can help you if that's happened. That shouldn't happen, really.
Yeah, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I think in terms of the tests, usually they invite everyone that meets the minimum criteria, don't they, to the test, usually, unless they specify otherwise. So for tests, that hasn't happened to me, but in terms of interviews, I mean, that has happened every year to me, where I do meet their minimum criteria, but I haven't been invited to interview to some places. And some years, so for example, Cov and Warwick, I interviewed at 3 years ago now, and I've applied there each year and they didn't invite me back.
And Kirsty?
Yeah, I would share the same as Rhiannon. I think for tests, I get the impression that, you know, if you meet the minimum criteria, the majority of people do get invited, and I would definitely share that experience. But absolutely for interview, I would have met the minimum criteria each year, and definitely did not get interviews everywhere I applied.
Yeah, I just want to add, I know every year, I think on the group, there is always a post where someone does say, oh, I wasn't invited to this test, even though I meet the minimum criteria. The few people I hear back from, it's usually some issue with their qualifications. Perhaps they've got a foreign qualification that wasn't easily transferable to the UK standards. In other cases where it's been a mix-up, I don't know, because people, once they've made a post, they've never really come back and said, oh, this was what happened as well. But there does seem to always be a mishap. But I would echo what was mentioned earlier about contacting the uni if that does happen to you. So we've got a question from Jess, which says, hey everyone, first of all, thank you for putting this on. My question is in relation to children. I was wondering if any of your cohort are juggling children with the course and how they are finding it. Miranda?
Hi, Jess. Yes, loads of people in my year are juggling children. So actually a third of my year group have got caregiver responsibilities. All of them are all very diddy children as well, like under 5. And they are managing spectacularly. They're doing really well. I think it has been tough, like the past 6 months with lockdown, because most of them had to kind of take on that homeschooling type situation. And in that scenario, all of them actually ended up going on a virtual placement instead of being paired up with the NHS. So that meant that they were like paired with clinical tutors within the university, and they would do like case study work, vignettes, like role plays, like that kind of thing. So that was a little bit tricky, but now everyone's moving back onto an NHS placement, and that was very much like their choice in a way. Like if there were parents within that who did have some flexibility, they got matched up with an NHS service, but that was kind of the uni trying to be accommodating. But yeah, when life was normal, like everything was fine. Last 6 months have been weird, and now I think it's getting fine again.
Great, thank you. Ellie?
Hello. So 2 people in my cohort, as far as I'm aware, have got children. It's hard to kind of give you an in-depth answer to that, but if I pretended like I had kids and tried to put myself into the mindset of how much time I have, I think it would be okay. You get, especially kind of weekday, you're 9 to 5 anyway, and then Exeter let you be really flexible with study time, so you can pull those around depending on when you need them. So if I had an assignment due on the Monday, I could potentially pull 2 study days on the Thursday, Friday to do instead of placement, and then just work 9 to 5 from home like that and do the uni work within working time. I think there was only probably about a 3-week period in the summer where things got really rough and I was working a lot, but that was probably more my fault because I grossly underestimated the amount of work that one of our assignments required. So I think if you're super organized and really get a grasp from the people in the years above about the time demands of each piece of work, it's really doable, I think.
Great, Rhiannon?
Really got a lot to add to that. I mean, I'm only in the 2nd week. I know there is someone, there's at least one person in my cohort with kids, but I'm not sure at the moment, week 2. So I'll leave it to the others.
Kirsty?
Our cohort started as a parentless cohort, but actually a couple have gone on maternity leave, one being the male in our cohort who's now obviously returned and is a father, and we've had a couple join from the year above who have been on mat leave and joined back, and so everyone has teeny tiny humans, and yeah, I think they manage incredibly well, really. I guess it's just a really different juggle to those of us that aren't parents, and I think it would be really, really difficult for us to kind of answer on their behalf. I mean, I personally cannot imagine juggling a child alongside the DCLIN, but never have I been in that situation. So I think it just is something that parents have wonderful magical abilities to do, and it certainly is doable. There are lots of people that do it.
Just to add as well. Oh, sorry. It's
Ellie.
really common to get pregnant on the course. Really common.
Yeah.
And if you do, you get full pay maternity, like if you're working in the NHS, and then once your year's mat leave is up, you then join the year below and then continue.
Great.
I was just going to add, sorry, Jason, I was just going to add that I've put a link to a podcast in the chat, which is a couple of parents in the cohort below me at Hearts, who have recorded a couple of podcasts about being parents and trainees at the same time. So that might be of interest.
Great, thank you. I'm sure that'll be really useful. We got a question directed at Miranda. So having experience only with children and teens, were there any challenges during the application/interview process? And was it difficult to adjust during training?
Hello, Rachel. No, I don't so with respect to the application and interview process, I didn't find any challenges at all, to be honest. I think it's one of those things, like, sometimes in your mind, you can kind of get a chip on your shoulder about lacking certain experience. Like, I definitely had that about not having a master's, and I felt really kind of like worried and scared about that, to the point I almost announced it in an interview. It was really weird. And I think as long as you don't do that, and you don't get too preoccupied by the fact that you haven't covered all the populations that ever existed across the span of time, you'll be fine. It's just kind of applying those skills. And in terms of adjusting to training, I actually found that the child and adolescent experience put me in a really nice position to get going with placements. I actually found it kind of refreshing joy to be working with adults who you don't really have to convince to want to come and see you. They just come and talk to you, and they're kind of thankful afterwards. I was like, how refreshing, wonderful. And actually it was interesting to speak to a lot of people in my year group didn't have that experience and were really quite nervous about it. So actually, I think it's kind of almost like a baptism of fire working with kids. So I feel like it's a good experience to bring to the course. I'm a fan, so don't worry.
I've also found that it's really common for people to come onto training with experience in just one area.
Yeah.
It's far less common for people to have done AP roles in loads of different areas, because I'm sure, as many of you can appreciate, you get a bit pigeonholed in AP posts, and it's like, once you're in LD, you're in LD, and you can only then get AP posts within an LD umbrella, and that's fine. That happened to me. All my previous experience was in learning disabilities. And it didn't hold me back. I think it's a little bit of a myth that you have to have a real breadth of experience, and actually you can have experience in a really specialist area, and that's okay.
Great, thank you. Got a question from Lily. How would you advise preparing for interview days with different tasks/focuses? So Miranda?
Hi, Lily. I think honestly, the prep that did me the best was kind of focusing on me as a person rather than the task itself. So I will explain that because that's not clear at all. But as in things to help like reduce my anxiety and also prepare for any kind of interviewer I could have. So that's like actually preparing and practicing with having a panel. The first interview I had the first time I applied, I had a panel, and I don't know, like I'd only practiced with one person, and I came into a room and there were 4, and I was just like dying. It just threw me off completely. I was so scared and nervous. And I think more focus on that type of stuff, like trying to practice when people prompt you versus when they don't prompt you, if they're looking smiley, if they're not looking smiley, like that sort of stuff psychs me out massively. And I think kind of the other stuff where you're thinking about like your experiences and like reflecting on that, and examples of like when you've worked in a team, like you can apply that quite well in different sort of interview situations. So I think there's more commonality in different tasks than there is difference. It's just almost like a different way of like packaging them up, I would say.
And I've got a probing question there, Miranda. You used the word reflecting, and that's a real important word in psychology. And it's not necessarily something everyone would have experienced doing. It is a skill you learn, and depending on the job, not everyone will have had that. So how would you recommend people go about learning to reflect on their experiences to show their best selves?
Yeah, great question. And I think like it's something that doesn't massively like come naturally to me, because I just like to bulldoze my way through things without really thinking about them. I would say follow the emotion in anything that you're doing. Like if anything kind of like sparks a little something in you, follow that. Like what is that saying? Like what is it bringing up in you? And stay with it and kind of like explore it a bit more. Because I found for me, like I'd be doing work, like things would kind of trigger off in me, and then I would just like look in a different direction and not really reflect on that. And I was really missing a very key like learning opportunity in that, because I was just like on to the next, don't really want to deal with that. And I think it's very much on like thinking about the process of doing things rather than the end result. I'm quite an end result kind of person, not a journey kind of person. And that was quite a big shift for me, to think about like the process of things that would lead up to you getting an outcome. Like the outcome isn't really what's important, it's like how you got there. The saying is true, it's the journey, not the destination. I should have listened.
Thank you. And Ellie, going back to the original question about how you would advise preparing for interview days with different tasks and focuses.
I would say you can't prepare for the tasks. No preparation I would have done would have prepared me for what they throw at you. Even some of the questions in the interview were so like random, and I mean that in the nicest possible way to the courses that ask them, but some of them just asked me a question and I'd be like, why is that relevant? But anyway, that's another something probably for another time. In terms of preparing for the interview, I think it's a really good idea to have to try and prepare some experiences that you could talk about in quite a lot of detail. So it's always good to have a case that you have worked on from referral to discharge, if possible. I know that's not always possible with the experience people have, but if you can talk about referral, maybe triage, assessment, formulation, intervention, evaluation, discharge, blah, 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 blah. And you can keep going on that for like 5-10 minutes, that's great. And I practiced my answers with my supervisor at the time. It's really good to have someone that's not going to be afraid to tell you, and she wasn't afraid to tell you if your answers are rubbish or what you could add in. But Jason brought up a really good point about reflection. So when I say knowing a case from start to finish, I don't mean I did this and then I did this, and just so you know, I can do a WACE, and also I know how to write a risk assessment, and I can do X, Y, and Z. They're not that interested in that, because like the majority of people that apply have experience in that area, like they can do a cognitive assessment, they can do a risk assessment. I did this, I did that. It's reflecting on that experience, and reflecting for me is something happened and then you sit down and you think back about what did I learn from that experience, what went really well for that person in that case, what didn't go very well, and how did that make me feel, either if it went well or it didn't go well, but also what would I do differently next time. And it's always good to try and reflect on how you would develop and how you might approach that case, because no case with any client goes amazingly, like, all the time. Like, I'm sure everyone can think of a case where things maybe didn't go, like, it was a pretty bumpy road to get them to where you need them to be, and maybe why was it a bumpy road, how could you have done things differently to improve the experience for that client. Yeah, I've forgotten the question and I'm also rambling and I apologise.
I think you touched upon a very key point, because one of the first questions on the application, often people will misinterpret that as kind of a place to really explain what I've done, which actually that's not at all what that space is for. It is more of a reflective piece. And I have seen that there is a question around that coming up, so I'll probably touch upon that again. But kind of keeping on to the same question, Rhiannon.
Yeah, I guess so. Advice on preparing. I guess it very much depends on you and the bits that you think that you might need to brush up on. So for me, I was quite comfortable talking about my clinical cases because I was doing them all the time. It was part of like the work that I was doing. I was always reflecting on them with my supervisor. So for me, I didn't feel like I needed to do a huge amount of prep around that side of things, because it was something that I was just doing day in, day out. Whereas more of like the research side of things, I kind of spent a bit of time brushing up on that, because I knew that it was something that I could probably do with brushing up on, or just reminding myself, or even practicing talking about my undergrad research, just so that I could talk about it in a way that was really clear and concise and I didn't forget bits and start waffling. So I also practiced with people when I could. So yeah, I think it very much depends on you and what you feel like you need to prepare. And I wouldn't make it difficult for yourself either. So your clinical case, if you're preparing a clinical case to talk about, it doesn't need to be the most complex case in the world. If you can talk about just the process of how you came to understand that person's difficulties and then what you did together, it can be something really simple. And actually sometimes it's easier to talk about something that's simple rather than someone that's really complex, and it's really easy to trip over. So finding things that you're comfortable talking about and that you can talk about quite easily, it doesn't need to be massively difficult. And I guess a side note to that is be nice to yourself when you're prepping as well, because in a couple of my interviews I spent like a month beforehand just prepping solidly, and I was miserable for a good month, and I was a horrible person to my partner because I was just moody all the time because I wasn't doing anything nice. And you can spend all the time in the world prepping and prepping and prepping, and there'll be things that you don't prep. So be nice, take the time out to look after yourself when you're doing it as well.
Great, thank you. And Kirsty?
I completely agree with what everyone else has said. I mean, I don't have a humongous amount to add, but I guess the thing that often comes into my mind when I think about kind of prepping both the application form and prepping for interview is less about kind of specific knowledge and preparing specific understandings of things like formulation assessment, or like Ellie was saying, specifically kind of sharing what you've done or what you can do, and more about really knowing who you are and why you want to do this and what your values are and what brings you to where you are right now. And I think a lot of the others have touched on it when it comes to reflection. there's also something about kind of just taking a little bit of a step back and actually thinking, why am I doing this? What is it about clinical psychology that makes me want to go through this really, really competitive, tricky journey? What is it about the role of clinical psychology that makes me want to do that over something else? And I think a lot of people that I speak to kind of talk about the year they got on as the year that they kind of changed their relationship with clinical psychology a little bit and changed their relationship with the kind of path to clinical psychology, and knowing that there might be an option B or C or something else that you could do instead. I don't know whether that's helpful, but certainly for me, kind of becoming really clear on who I was, what I cared about, and the kind of clinician I wanted to be felt really different the year that I got on. I think that was the difference that made the difference.
Just to quickly add, I'm really sorry, I could talk for England. What Kirsty said is really great advice for that mini question about, like, I've got my thingy up here and I can't remember what it's called. What would you hope to gain from training? That's a really good question to really think, why clinical psychology rather than any other very similar careers? Like, why do you not want to be a straight therapist? Why do you not want to be a counsellor, a forensic psychologist, and educate, like really hone in about what it is about clin psych you want to do. And if you could get a really clear idea of what a clin psych does, and be able to show that you know what a clin psych does, and that's not just sitting in a room with someone and asking them how they feel. That's really good to show that in that little mini question.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think being honest with yourself about that, asking why do I want to be a clinical psychologist? Because yeah, I think Eddie touched upon a real point, because there are other options in this career path. For many, and I've spoken to many, it's just that title of doctor, which, you know, I can understand to a degree.
Yeah, don't say that.
Yeah, don't say that though. So we got a question from Daniela, who says, my question is on the research experience. I don't have any publication. From your experience, does it play a key role in getting shortlisted? Miranda?
Hello, I'll keep this short and sweet. No, it does not. Haven't come close to a publication, don't have one, nothing under my belt, so no.
Ellie?
I'm going to follow Miranda's lead and try and be concise. I can do it. So the answer is no. I had one paper that was in preparation, was not published. I don't know of anyone on my cohort that's published a million things. It's really not important. Well, it is important. It's not like if you don't have any, you're not going to get an interview, because that's just not the case. And that part about disseminations, think about what else you've done. So it's not just papers, it's have you presented at a conference? Have you just presented to your colleagues? I made a PBS training package, disseminated that. I did a presentation about ACT. I put that on. Like, anything that you have taught or communicated to other people that's relevant, stick it in. Why not?
Absolutely. Rhiannon?
I echo everybody else. No, I didn't have anything. And I think I did a leaflet for service users in one of the places that I was about. I can't even remember what it was about, but that made the cut for that dissemination bit as well.
Great. And Kirsty?
I'll be a fourth no. I definitely didn't have a publication. I think the only thing I've ever published is a magazine article about autism in a schools magazine, which definitely not a peer-reviewed journal by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, no, you don't need a publication. It may well give you an extra point here and there on certain courses that kind of do the point scoring systems, which is why you'll hear of these kind of tick box criteria, but it's by no means something that will stop you getting an interview.
Thank you. So hopefully that's of comfort to everyone. Yeah. So sorry, I've kind of lost my place a little bit. Here we go. So the next question is from Hannah, who I believe had to leave, but we'll catch the recording later. Oh no, it was just a point about the Surrey test was the same as UEL and Salomons. I seem to remember some controversy over it as different centres gave different time frames. Yeah, I remember that as well. So Lydia's asked, when talking about research interviews, do you mean they ask about your research experience or more around asking you to design something on the spot? Miranda?
I've had both. In both my interviews, they asked me to design something on the spot, and then in one of them, they asked me to talk about a research project that I'd done from start to finish, which is just hilarious because I haven't. Yeah, that is it. I just find the research stuff really stressful. I think my only advice there is to like show your workings out. I definitely improved my performance the second time round by just like talking through my thought process. I wasn't any more illuminated the second time round, I must stress. Like, I did not know the answer of how to design this study, but I think I was just showing a little bit more of like where I was leaning to, like the sorts of things that I was considering, that kind of thing, which, yeah, hopefully showed them that I had the raw materials and they could like mold me into something a bit more like closely resembling a researcher. But yeah, it's a bit stressful.
Ellie?
So sorry, I forgot the question. I'm not doing very
So
well.
basically, when you're talking about research interviews,
Yeah.
do you mean that they ask about the research experience or more you designing something?
Both. Yeah, as Miranda said, I had both. As I don't have a master's, I re-remembered my undergraduate dissertation kind of inside out, and then if they asked me about what I'd done, I just talked about that, and that seemed to go okay. And I think one that I've heard from quite a lot of people is that if you get asked a really difficult research question and you really don't know the answer, don't just try and wing it and say something that is like a stab in the dark. My course only expects you to have kind of really rudimentary levels of research knowledge. They have started our teaching from scratch, like they put everyone on the same level, which has been really helpful for someone like me. So yeah, and you can say something like, I don't know, but I'll look that up in a book about research methods. I mean, like, as a clinician, you're not going to be expected to know all these research methods and designs off by heart. I mean, I did some power calculations off WikiHow, and I'm not ashamed to say it because I think most people do Google how to do this stuff. You don't remember it unless you really love it. I don't think the majority really love this stuff. So they're not looking for you to just be able to be like, I know this and it's in my head and I'm amazing at research. They're not looking for that. Otherwise you'd go and do a research PhD.
Great, thank you, Rhiannon.
Yeah, I've had both as well. So again, I used my undergrad when I was talking through my own research, and I kind of structured it in my head. I found it really easy to structure it almost like kind of like the abstract. So like the background, why did I bother doing it, you know, the methods, what I used to analyze it, and then just any kind of implications for it. And I found that a really easy way to structure it in my head to remind me. And I also practiced just telling everyone I knew about it, whether they cared or not. And I've also been asked to kind of prepare a piece of research on the spot. And I guess with that, I just go as simple as possible. I tried to make it really complicated in one of the first ones that I had. I was like, oh my God, I need to show off all these research skills that I definitely don't have. And tried to do something really difficult, and I couldn't really justify why I was doing certain things, or because I didn't really know. When they pushed me a bit more on certain things, like, well, why would you use that analysis and not this one? I was like, I've got no idea. So just trying to make it as kind of simple simple as possible, and it's okay not to know absolutely everything.
Great, thank you. And finally, Kirsty.
I don't have anything extra to add, really. I would definitely also just echo, I've had both across different interviews, more so the latter, so kind of being asked to design things kind of on the spot. But yeah, I definitely agree with the points around kind of just saying don't know if you don't know. I think it's okay not to know everything, and I think there's a whole myth kind of pre-training that it feels like you basically have to be a qualified clinical psychologist to get onto the course, and in actual fact they're looking for somebody that's ready to be trained and to be molded, like Miranda said. And I think also this idea of kind of sharing your process is a really good shout, in that you might not know the full answer, but you definitely will have some skills and some knowledges that will help get you part the way there. So that's a good shout.
Great, thank you. Moving on, then we've got a question from Megan, who asks, was there anything about your final application that you think made the difference or made you stand out? Miranda? I think you did a video on this, so just to get a summary.
Yeah. I think this ties into a question that's going to come later, but I think I just like really moved away from the whole tick box idea. The first time round, I was really just trying to like shove in as many like buzzwords as I could, and I just thought like, oh, I've worked as an assistant somewhere, and that's a really exciting thing, when like there's thousands of people across the country who've done exactly that. So I think making it a much more personal piece of writing, like it made a huge difference. As in, like the first time round, I got one reserve list interview, the rest were flat out rejections, and then I got 3 interviews and a reserve list interview offer. It like I couldn't believe how much difference it made, and I think like I'd actually started investing some time into like the reflecting process, which I'd avoided so much up until that point, and thinking about like what's actually changed me as a like which experiences that I've been through have changed me, and like what has happened as a result of that, and like why do I think that that person on the other side is then more suited to training. But yeah, I feel like I just allowed a little bit more personality to inject into my writing as well, because I just read back my first application not that long ago, and I was like, oh my God, that is so boring. And I think you're so anxious about it, and you're just like, I just want to show that I have everything. But I think it just ends up being really generic when you try and squish in as much as you can. So just focusing on the like couple of things that really meant something to you and really changed you, I think is what helped mine get a bit more attention.
Thank you. Ellie?
Yeah, totally agree with all of the above. So I've got mine up, haven't looked at it in a couple of years. And yeah, first couple I did, it was very much like, I'm an assistant and I've done all these amazing things, look at them. And they'll get hundreds like that, because most assistants get similar experiences and look for CPD opportunities which are very similar to everyone else's. I've also for a couple of years helped people with their applications as well, and what I see quite often is even people being like, this is the service and this is what the service does, and taking up word count with something that you could just Google the service and find out what they do if you really wanted to. Like, really don't put anything in there that they're probably already going to know. I mean, I think most of the people that scan through these things are clinicians, psychs, so they're going to know what APs do. They don't need to be told. So mine, looking at it, I took 2 sentences for an intro, and then I mostly took it as a reflective piece. I took 2 cases and I wrote in quite a bit of detail about my reflections about my experiences of working with those 2 cases. One, because I worked in forensics, that was working with sex offenders, so it was my reflections about working with sex offenders, and then the other was a case that was quite rough for me. There were a lot of systemic issues that went on, safeguardings, etc. So my reflections about that, really, I talked about, made it really personable to me. I tried to shine my personality, shine through, rather than just being like, I have done this stuff and I could be anybody. Then, as we've already said, it's a really good idea to think about why a clin psych specifically in the what do you hope to get from training rather than any other career. Information about yourself, activities, interests. I would really recommend that you don't put in there anything about psychology. And this is just my opinion. Feel free to ignore me. But I think that that question is, show me you're a person outside of clinical psychology. What other hobbies do you do? What are your interests? And my first application, I put something like, I read journals or something in my spare time. And my supervisor was like, do you? And I was like, I've read like one, that counts. And he was like, don't put that, like, they don't want to see someone that's going to burn themselves out by reading about psychology 24/7. When you're not in teaching, when you're not on placement, you're reading about the latest therapy. They don't want that, because that's not a healthy work-life balance. I think I've covered most of the questions in the application, but
Right. And Rhiannon?
I really just kind of echo what Miranda and Ellie have said. My application was by no means perfect. It didn't get me like a full house of interviews. I got one interview each time, and it definitely could have done with more work, and it probably could have been more reflective. And I don't think, I don't think there was anything in particular that made a huge difference and made me stand out. But I think being reflective is really important, and not just doing the
Where would you recommend people look about learning to reflect? Because I know there are different models out there like Driscoll, Kolb, but what would you recommend to someone who's never reflected before?
I really like, is it the Gibbs? Is it Gibbs?
Yeah.
I guess the other guys can help me out. It's the Gibbs model of reflection. Oh no. But I did not know how to reflect when I started working in psychology. It took me ages to really get it off the ground. But it was one that was suggested to me by a supervisor, and I think as an initial starting point, I found it really helpful, because it tells you, like, okay, point one, what did you do? And then, like, it goes through like a cycle, and if you Google it, you'll find it all over the internet with like pre-diagrams and stuff. But I found that really helpful as a starting point, just to talk me through how to start reflecting. And I also started a bit of a reflective journal, which I've found really helpful as well. Again, just to start off with following the bit of the model, but then you start getting used to what it's like to reflect. And then I'd put in things maybe once a week, like just thinking about the week and what it was that I did, and kind of something specific, and reflecting on that. And I found that really helpful, because the more that I was doing it, the easier I started to find it.
Thank you. And then finally, Kirsty?
I'm just going to start by following up on this idea of reflection, because I think it can feel quite mysterious when we start talking about the word reflection and the fact that it's a thing we do in psychology. And whilst it may take a little bit of learning, and I agree with Rhiannon, things like the Gibbs model are really helpful, I also think it's something that the majority of people do fairly naturally if you kind of stop and somebody is able to help you name that as reflection. Essentially, it's taking a pause and thinking about what's just happened, how did that happen, where did it leave me, where's it going to take me in the future. And I think actually kind of our thought processes naturally as human beings lead ourselves to reflection in some ways. Anyway, it's just about kind of knowing that that's what you're doing, I think. I've slightly lost touch with what the question was, but it was something about the application.
So anything about
what difference? Thanks. I think I think I would say the same as I had done maybe a question or two ago, which is around kind of knowing who you want to be as a clinician, and I think this might be fairly specific to courses like Hearts, who I would say are fairly distinctive in kind of the values that it holds. But certainly the change in my application was being a lot more explicit about my values and the things I cared about and the things that by that point kind of felt quite non-negotiable for me as a clinician. I think I rambled on about politics and social justice and how the world is unfair and we should do a lot better at doing better at things. So yeah, I think I would definitely echo this idea of kind of being quite personal and spending some time really thinking about what it is that you want to tell them about yourself that is something different to what somebody else would tell them about themselves. I think it's really important that it reflects you rather than any old clinician that has had some similar experiences. So yeah, I would definitely echo what other people said.
Great, thank you. So it all seems to be that one theme around being true to yourself and reflecting.
I'm considering throwing a small spanner in the works. So there's something I learned on training that I didn't know about, but there's reflective and reflexive, and they're different things, and I didn't know that. But they talk about reflexive and reflective on training, and essentially the difference is reflexive is when you were in the moment, did you kind of think about what you were doing and then make different decisions based on your thinking, and then reflection is after the event, so what we've been talking about. But potentially if you can show a bit of reflexivity in your application or in your interview, that would be great. So maybe I was going to use this model with this person, but after doing blah, 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 I've realized that model wouldn't fit because blah, 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 so I chose this model instead. And that's reflexivity. And I hope I've explained that okay.
Great, thank you. So I got a question from SS. So, hiya, I'm really struggling to fit everything into the word count on the form as I want to reflect on many experiences. Would you say there are certain experiences that should be prioritized? Also, can you save space by saying I learned this rather than specifying where you learned something from? Example, when working on X ward, when working as an AP, I learned X, Y, Z. So I think we covered a little bit about that, but more specifically, Miranda, you want to take the lead?
I wouldn't say that there's any formula to certain experiences needing to be prioritized over others. I would just like try and tune in with the ones that you're most excited about talking about and the ones that like you feel led to the most personal growth, and drop out the rest. Like I think it's a lot of like information tightly packed into not a lot of space. So I think it's better to just pick a few that you can expand on well and reflect on well than trying to squeeze lots in, because you've always got that work experience section in. I think we always forget about that, where you can list absolutely everything and you can bullet point things that you did there. So I think, yeah. So yeah, sorry, that's not very specific, but just try and like.
I think it really highlights the point that there's no formula or to this whole process, and it's really what you want to get across. I just want to add, we've got about 14 minutes left, so wow, time goes really quick. So we'll try and go through the rest of the questions as quick as we can. Ellie, if you would like to just add your point of view to that.
Yes, I'll be concise, noted. So for me, I sat down and I thought, what are my experiences so far that just jump into my head straight away? And everyone's got one or two. When someone asks you about your job, what anecdote do you have? What story do you have about what's happened to you that really sticks in your head because you've already been reflecting about it already? If it's something that's really kind of personal and meaningful to you. the second half, I think you do need to give context about where you learnt things. If what you learnt is so general that you don't need to give context, then I probably wouldn't put it in. Does that make any sense at all? Like learning specific to the context or the case or the client, rather than I learned reflection, or I learned, I don't know, risk assessment, because it's too general. They want the specifics.
Great, thank you. Rhiannon?
Yeah, I echo what everyone else said, and about talking about things that you feel have made a difference to you, and that might be things that were quite challenging and didn't go particularly well, but reflecting on kind of what you did, because sometimes if something went really, really well, then you might not have particularly interesting reflections necessarily. So just finding one that you find has made a difference. Yeah, and a bit of context is always helpful. I wouldn't put like everything, like I worked here at this address and this is what they do, but in my time working in CAMS or whatever.
Great, thank you. And Kirsty?
I think in terms of context, just enough for it to make sense to somebody that isn't you. Definitely don't go wild with context. In terms of, I've lost my train of thought. In terms of the other bit of the question, I think I think what I was going to say is what I did in terms of choosing what to write about is try to think about the kind of things that connected all of my experiences together, or many of my experiences together. So I think, as I said when I introduced myself, I had all sorts of different stuff all over the place, left, right and centre, and I hadn't until kind of my last application made any sense of how I'd made any of the choices to do what I'd done, or how anything fit around one another. And I think one thing I did which really, really helped me is, I don't know whether you guys have heard of a life river, but I went through the process of doing a life river, which is essentially where you put where you list different experiences that you've been through or that you have encountered in your life, and people that are important to you or that have been influential to you, in a process, almost chronologically, I suppose, and you can make it into a metaphor, add rocks for the bits that are tricky, and there's all sorts of things that you can do with it. But essentially that helped me kind of highlight, okay, so this bit linked to this bit because of these two things, and it helped to pull out my values. It helped me think about how I'd gone from A to B to C, and I think that in turn then helped me kind of figure out, okay, what is it that I care about here? Why am I even where I'm at? What are the kind of things that have shaped me to be who I am right now, and therefore helped me answer the question around kind of what makes me suitable or better suited for training. I think I kind of just pulled on that really.
Great, thank you. We've got a question from Rach, who asks, I wondered how you approached the personal statement in terms of approaching it as ticking boxes, or if you actually just wrote according to what you wanted to say / reflect on, or maybe a combination. Let's reverse the order if Kirsty wants to go first.
Sure. I feel like we've slightly just answered that. Like my answer is kind of the same to that question as the previous one. So definitely not in a tick box approach. That was absolutely not my approach, although arguably was probably my approach the first time I applied, or a lot closer to a tick box approach the first time I applied. But yeah, definitely reflection.
Oh, does anyone have anything different they want to add onto that one then?
I'm just trying to drastically read mine. No, I really think reflective piece, not I did this, that's why I'm great piece. If you take nothing else from this, that is.
If you copy and pasted the job description into that section, it wouldn't go in there. So yeah, you can't get all the ticky boxy stuff in there.
Yeah, and I think that touches upon the point. There is more to the application than the 3 questions. There is your employment history, your qualifications, so they will see what you've done elsewhere. Sorry, Kirsty.
I was just going to say a really top tip I was given once, and this sounds so simple, but I know that I absolutely didn't do it until somebody told me, is to get what I'd written and then think after every paragraph, have I tied it back to, and this makes me suitable to training for training because, and obviously you don't have to explicitly write that, but it's so easy to get lost in this. Oh, I think you want me to say this, and I think you want me to have done this, and I think they want me to have jumped through this loop, and you start just kind of writing things that you think people want to hear instead of actually answering the question. And it's really, really easy to do that. So definitely just continuously look back at the question and think, am I actually answering the question of this makes me suitable for training because.
Great, thank you. We have another question. I think you guys touched upon this at the beginning, but if you could quickly just remind everyone how many men are on your cohorts. So we've got 1, 2, 1.
I think there's about 10 on ours, so about a third.
Great. Just going to go through. So Shannon has asked, can you recommend any helpful reading pre-training that help during interviews, or do you just generally recommend reading widely? So anything you just kind of recommend?
I'm gonna let the other ladies take this because I'm not the biggest reader preparer.
So I went on each university that I got an interview for, and I looked up their course ethos. I looked up which models they focus on, and I had to think about some of the pros and cons of those models. I read the NHS core values and thought about how I could apply those to my experiences. Someone else go while I think.
I would really.
Sorry, go ahead, Kirsty.
I would really recommend the book Surviving Clinical Psychology by James Randall. From a reflective standpoint, it's superb, and I think I will continue to read the chapters even when I'm qualified. I think it's a really great book to at least just get you thinking about some questions that you may not have already thought about.
Just making a quick note of that one. Yeah, I don't think I've got any like specifics. I think I did a lot of reading for the first few interviews I did, and maybe had a little bit of information overload, and then just as I've gone through like the work that I've been doing, I've found reading that's related to that, but actually that I can then go back to, that has helped me with kind of interviews and things. So if I was doing a bit of reading about formulation as part of my work, and then when it came to coming back to interviews and just thinking, oh, I could maybe just have a little look at formulation again and a little bit about that. But yeah.
I've got a book that won't really help you get on the doctorate, but it's just really a fun read. I really enjoyed it. Is The Skeleton Cupboard by Dr. Tanya Byron. I just really enjoyed that book. Got me hooked from the first page. So it just kind of chronicles of her experiences on the doctorate training back in the 80s, I think, as well. So yeah, if you're looking for something to read and you would get pumped for the
I'd second
doctorate.
that.
Sorry, Kirsty, go.
Yeah, it's a great read. I'd second that. No, I was just saying I'd second.
Great. So we've got another question from SS who asks, if you have a low 2-1 and no masters, but you do have one publication and have had 2 assistant psych roles, do you think it's better to apply to unis that use shortlisting tests? I just want to add that universities have different rules on this when it comes to the grades, and I would say it's worth looking at the clearinghouse to see what they say, because there are some that will say if you have a low 2-1, we'll accept you if you've got a master's. There are some that flat out say actually even with a master's we won't accept it, and there are some that are a lot more kinder with it and will actually accept anyone as long as they got as long as it's GBC.
Sometimes you can find out on the grapevine whether unis have points systems or not. And then I guess you think about what you've got in relation to that. But I believe that the universities that have the tests that I explained earlier are there to widen access and to help people that haven't perhaps had the same opportunities as other people due to a massive range of factors. So I definitely think they are, if you feel like you're not going to score loads and loads of points, then potentially it might be a good idea, but I wouldn't recommend just picking a course off the fact that it's got a test or not. Like, really look into the ethos, what they teach, where their placement bases are. There's a huge amount of factors in picking a university, and I think sometimes people just are like, these 4 are near where I live now, so I'm going to pick those, but actually really look into the courses and what they offer, I think, before making decisions.
Okay, thank you. Anyone got anything else they want to add on to that one?
I think I would
Sorry,
just kind of second that point that Ellie made about being really specific about kind of where you choose and spending a bit of time thinking about which course you apply to. I'm a really big believer that actually the majority of people that kind of say they when they get in, it's the course that feels right to them and that fits their values and fits their ethos and fits the way that they work. So I think spend a little bit of time finding the courses that really feel like they make sense to you. And of course, not everyone has the privilege of being able to move around the country and things like that. So obviously there's that to bear in mind too, but where you can, certainly read into what the courses are like.
thank you. Anyone else got anything they want to add? I think we've got one more question before anything else. So Rach has just kind of elaborated on the question asked earlier. Sorry, I meant reflecting on things that seem more tick boxy, as in reflecting on diversity, research, etc. Does that question seem a bit clearer to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Miranda, do you want to take the lead?
I don't know. I just feel like if it feels tick boxy to you, then maybe that's not the thing to lead with. Like, what do I mean by that? 1 second. I just feel like if you're trying to put things in front of people because you think that's what they want to read, like often that's just not the best representation of you as a person. And I think like it's hard to capture enthusiasm about things that you feel like you have to write about. Like diversity and stuff like that probably will come up at interviews and things. Like I didn't really touch on those things in my application. I don't think there's anything that you can write that will make someone reading it be like, this person definitely gets through. Like I just don't think it works like that necessarily. Like I'd be much more inclined to just lead with the things that you're passionate to talk about and the things that really made an impact on you.
Okay, Ellie?
Yeah, totally agree. I would not try and squeeze your reflections into areas that you think they might want you to talk about. Think about the case firsthand and then reflect on that about what you're passionate about, because sometimes in interview, like your answers need to be a few minutes long, and if you're not really passionate about what you're talking about, then you'll dry up really quickly. So definitely kind of reflect, think about what's interesting to you rather than trying to tick boxes about what you think they want to hear.
Rhiannon?
Yeah, again, I would agree, but that's not to say that if you've got a really interesting reflection on something that does feel like a tick box type thing, then don't do it. Like if you've got something really interesting that has changed your views about something related to diversity, then by all means include that.
Great. And Kirsty?
I agree. I have nothing to add.
Thank you for the short answer. So that just about wraps it up, guys, but I think it would be really nice to have maybe some final words from the panelists, just anything you want to say, and then we'll end it there. So who wants to go first? We'll go reverse. Kirsty, I'll put you on the spot.
I think my final words would be to be yourself and trust the process, and you'll get there. If it's right for you, you'll get there at the point where it's right.
Right. Thank you, Rhiannon.
Oh, I missed Kirsty's. My internet froze. Darn it. I think a big thing for me is look after yourself. It can be a really horrible process, and it can just feel like just a bit like luck of the draw, and it's hard not to take rejections personally if they happen, or to feel like you need to spend every hour of your life thinking about it. And I know that seems like, oh, it's easy for you to say now that you're on there, but I think in the last couple of years I've noticed that actually that's become more important for me, that I need to actually look after myself and not just like this is the be all and end all for me. I need to have a life.
Great, thank you, Ellie.
Yeah, I completely agree. Someone just put take home message for me is be your authentic self, and I think that's a really nice take home message to have. Thank you everyone for coming. Just to say, if anyone has any burning questions that we haven't covered, or if anyone's interested to find out more about the Exeter course, I'll leave my email in the chat in case you want to find out a bit more.
Great, thank you. And Miranda?
I would just say, like, don't forget how qualified you guys are. Like, I think we are like the most qualified people for being unqualified, if that makes sense. Before getting onto the doctorate, you'll have so much, like, it's streams and streams of experience and qualifications. Don't forget that you're great, and you're going to find a course that matches up to you in due course.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say, don't be paying people to be reading your applications or attending events. I think these lovely people have proven that actually the help is there for free. So, thank you everyone for coming. This has been recorded. What I'm going to do is, once it's been processed, I will post it on the group page if you want to rewatch it at any point. There'll be both a video and audio only version as well. But thanks everyone for coming. If the panelists can just stay for a couple of minutes to wrap things up, I'll make sure you get there in time for British Bake Off. But the rest of you can leave, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, guys.